Good evening. It is literally twilight here in Columbia, Missouri. It is 7:45 p.m., May the 13th, 2024, and I'm going to see if I can finish chapter 4 of my book, The UAP UFO Study Guide, a guide for first contact. Now, I will admit it is more of a study guide than a guide for first contact, but it is still a guide for first contact because in order to intelligently deal with first contact, whether you're a governmental official, a pilot, a civilian, just like me, I'm technically a retiree, um, or a laborer or a professor, whatever it is, you would need to know about the topic. The more you know about the topic, the better prepared you are to make conclusions and decisions, and those lead to actions. All right, so that's why I wrote this book. There were many reasons prompting the motivation to write the book, but the reason for the book is the aforementioned. All right, so now let's move on to another subparagraph or subchapter of chapter 4. Remember, chapter 4 was what are we going to learn about UFOs when we begin studying them, or simply what are we going to learn, because it was a simple title. Um, let's move on, okay? We will have to reevaluate our history. Oh my God. Now, there is a lot of pitfalls in this. First of all, I am not a big fan of a lot of these ancient astronauts theories, okay? It is obvious to me, both self-evident and through studies, through archaeology, through mountains and over 100 years of research, that it's obvious the pyramids were built by people. All the pyramids on the planet, they're made of freaking stone, for crying out loud. And if you're operating with stone and don't have steel beams and don't have cranes, the most stable structure is a stinking mound. Okay, and in order to make structures like this, you've got to have some mathematics. And folks, I'm kind of really tired of let me go on a bit of a rant. Every time European and American white archaeologists and scientists, for a long time, every time they went somewhere else and saw something advanced, they're like, well, these brown and black and red and yellow people couldn't have possibly built it. Must have been, the lost tribes of Atlantis or something, and later on it turned into aliens. It's a huge insult to the intelligence, ingenuity, and effort of humankind to do that. Okay, now that being said, if someone, I got a little itch in my ear, if someone from ancient Egypt, Mayan civilization, something like that, saw something in the sky, saw an alien craft or being or whatever it was, and was inspired to use their own ingenuity and their own science and their own effort, their own governmental organization to erect a structure or draw a carving, I don't think that's implausible. Okay, given the time scale of the universe, it's a given in this unpublished book of mine, and in I think the first chapter I established, given enough time, it's more than likely life arose long before maybe even our planet formed. Okay, so, and if they have a technological head start of 100 years, they and they progressed as fast as we did. That's not a given. They could progress slower or faster or in completely different directions. But let's say a civilization progresses technologically along the same timeline we do. If they had 100 years head start, everything would just look miraculous compared to us, right? Now, if they had thousands or millions of years, how could you even conceive? It might be nothing to cross a distance, not just across the galaxy, but from galaxy to galaxy. We don't know. Okay, but we still would have to reevaluate our history. First of all, if it is a given that there is an alien extraterrestrial presence, or an extra dimensional presence, or an alien AI, or something external to our planet and our biosphere, we would have to think, when did this begin? And if it began, before Roswell, and there's many indications that in World War II, for example, all the sides of bomber crews saw these lights following the bomber crews around. Particularly the Germans, the Americans, the British, and I think maybe the Japanese. Um, they all thought it was a secret weapon from the other side, but it turned out that all sides are like, we didn't know what this was, right? So they may go as far back as World War II. They may go back before the Civil War. We don't know. Now, we really have to look at our history and say, is any of our history, is anything we saw in our history an indication of this external technological presence? Is it a result of it, a byproduct of it, inspired by what? Okay, I've already established there are mountains and mountains and mountains of evidence that the Mayans built their stuff. I mean, you know, the Sumerians built their stuff. Okay, they may have hired laborers from outside their country. I don't begrudge that. Okay, there's proof that Indian architects may have traveled to the Mideast to erect things. They may have labored there like they do now, and certainly Greek architects were employed as far and wide as Persia. The Persians certainly hired Greek mercenaries, and so on and so forth. Right, so I don't begrudge that, but we really have to evaluate our history, and the closer we get to our modern time, the more we need to reevaluate things. For example, there is, I think his name was Major Corso. He wrote a book that I read called The Day After Roswell, and it was, he wrote things in a fairly matter-of-fact manner, stating that, they recovered alien technology, and his department fed the alien technology or concepts from it to other departments in the government and in private industry, and that's where we got things like cellophane and lasers and particle beams and things like that. And Colonel John Alexander he's written a lot about and spoken a lot about how that is nonsense. He's a debunker of that, but a UFO believer and someone who really investigates lots of anomalous things and has a positive opinion of it. He says there is a strong lineal descendant paper trail and intellectual trail of technological developments that led to the next thing and the next thing, and that developed those technologies. I mean, we'll be much closer to that answer because we'll take a far more serious look. The biggest problem with things like UFOs and other anomalous things like psi or psychic phenomena, as it's called, is that the mainstream really doesn't investigate it. And I was in a PhD program at Rutgers, and they would show us videos of the amazing Randy and famous debunkers, and just tell you that if you even looked at this stuff, there was something wrong with you. You were betraying science, right? However, I mean, as time goes by, certainly with UFO UAPs, we keep getting more evidence, and it gets more and more robust. Okay, we're going through what I call a titrated disclosure. Titration means a controlling of the dose, right? It's kind of like if you have a teapot steaming, only a little bit of that steam comes out and it whistles. If you flip that little lever and open the entrance of the teapot, more steam comes out, so on and so forth. And when you go to medicine and you get medicine, the doctor titrates your dose. They'll often give you a lower dose than is recommended to see how you respond to it, then increase it, and then so on and so forth. See if they can find an optimal dose Sometimes it'll be like at this threshold you have too many negative effects. We'll lower it a bit, we'll lower it a bit, and then we'll find the right mix. Okay, so we're going through a titrated disclosure, but it is accelerating, especially due to Freedom of Information Act, lawsuits and petitions and so on and so forth that keep revealing more and more data. Okay, so I think there's going to be a couple of very important conclusions that we can reach. One of which will be that if it is found out that Roswell was the source of so much of our technological advance and superiority here in the United States, I actually think it will make many people in other countries, in a sense, feel very relieved, and it will change the mental attitude of many countries that we label as third world countries, and we label them as inferior, right? Because we're Americans. Our system is best. Our morality is best. Our religion is best. Our way of government, our economy. That's why we're successful. But if it turns out that we simply won the lottery by, finding flying saucers or probes from another dimension and just, getting major advances in our technology, well, they're like, well, it's not that America is and Americans are that much superior to us. It's that they got a hell of a lucky break. And they may intensify their efforts to get this information both through legal channels and espionage, and it will become a big thing if it isn't now already, because again, we don't know everything that actually occurred, and many of us suspect that the government has layers of security, which we're going to address later. But that is really something to consider. And to close this concept up a little bit, the idea that we have to reevaluate our history. I think that science is overdue for a humongous literature review of archaeological and historical information of the fossil record, and this time by people who have, I hate to say this, the UFO community is filled with a lot of people that are just over the top, unhinged, and many of the more professional ones, the ones that are kind of more calm and sedate, they get drowned out. And oftentimes when you begin to suspect that something is going on, there is some kind of secrecy and something hidden, you begin to kind of throw all the boundaries away, and everything's possible, or everything's a psyop, right? And this is terrible. This is terrible. This is just as bad as saying everything's false, saying that everything is real, everything is a psyop. That gets you nowhere too. Okay, but we have social sciences. We have my discipline that I got as far as a PhD program in before my dad had a stroke. You have communication science, which I think is eminently positioned to study something like this, because we may have to communicate with these beings, and they may have been communicating with us for a long time. And we have many tools, everything from semiotics to transpersonal psychology, group communication, of course postmodernism, a very valuable tool in trying to see what the meaning of things are and what they mean from person to person and culture to culture. Okay, and one thing I think, as we begin to investigate this, we're going to know a little bit more about the nature of whatever is responsible for this phenomena, because right now, given our current level of understanding and investigation, they appear to not engage in the typical human dominance behaviors. I've said this in a previous chapter, any nation state, any culture, any religious group that had access to this very powerful technological material and industrial capability and military capability would have used it. I don't care if it's Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, any religion that had this to the exclusion of other groups would try to spread their message via it and suppress other religions, maybe even genociding them out. If it was, another country or the U.S., I mean, they would be dominating the world, which in a weird way kind of points towards maybe we did get some reverse engineered alien technology in this country because there was just an explosion of technological and military expansion in the U.S. Post World War II and especially post Roswell and that era. So I'm not that into Roswell. To me, it's the least interesting of all the data out there, least robust, but just as a concept, just as a theory, just as a theoretical exercise. All right, it is worth considering. Okay, and we will certainly have to reevaluate the world as it is now, and how modern history has played out and it continues to play out, and what this all means. I sincerely believe that if all the nations of the world put their heads together on this problem, we would be far better off in many ways, but we'd have to do it intelligently. We have a lot of psychopaths running our government, all governments, all militaries, but I think more so in the U.S. because this country kind of encourages, you know, this reptilian thinking. And no, I'm not talking David Icke. I'm talking about human R complex type stuff, right? And certainly ancient history, if we discover that there's this presence has been here for millennia, we really have to look at, did this inspire a lot of religions? Almost all religions talk about things in the sky and, sort of teleportation like stuff. In Judaism, like Kwisatz Haderach, like in Dune, that's an actual Hebrew phrase, and it's from the Kabbalah. It's about being two places at the same time, an advanced movement capability. And in Islam, there's something called a mirage, where the Prophet Muhammad is said to have traveled on a winged steed through heaven and through the skies and seen all these things. And same thing in Ezekiel, right? And of course, Hinduism talks about gods flying around in chariots and things like that, like the chariots of the god in von Däniken, who, again, an amusing book, but I think there's many plot holes in it. But all of this will have to be reevaluated and really put through a scientific, statistical analysis, okay? And I think we will learn more about ourselves and our planet through doing so, even if we don't uncover much about the phenomenon. Just looking at our history and our cultures and our planet, looking for a different data set than we look for, will always yield collateral information, all of which may be useful. Yay, science. All right. Let's continue with my final subchapter of chapter 4, and see you in the next one.